Hello, I'm former presenter Charlie Brooker, and you're watching Antiviral Wipe, an emergency homemade show about the thing that's happening, which has involved things like this. The novel coronavirus, street name COVID-19, has swept the globe. It's something scientists have never seen before, unless they've ever so much as glanced at the front cover of any 90s rave compilation CD ever. The pandemic has kept people everywhere trapped indoors with nothing to do. On the plus side, many have taken up absorbing new hobbies like baking, writing novels and screaming at the walls. As we've all endured months inside our humble abodes, the pandemic has been a great social equaliser. The phrase that sums it up best is, "We're all in this together." I actually shouted that just this morning at a bin man out of one of the upper windows of my east wing, and you know what? From the looks of it, he was moved to tears. The stock market has also taken a battering. Some economists fear it may have set capitalism's destruction of the planet back by up to 10 years. In another feel-good tale, 100-year-old former army captain Tom Moore raised £30 million for the NHS by walking round his garden. Sounds impressive, but Boris Johnson raised £350 million a week for the NHS just by driving a magic bus. Obviously, this is a worrying time for all of us, but it's important to laugh and have a... Sorry about the cardboard desk. Let's start with some nostalgia. 2,000 billion years ago, or January as I like to call it, our world was a different planet altogether, and the things that concerned us were different too.
Going it alone, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced they're stepping back as senior royals. Even the Queen wasn't told before they broke the news tonight.
Yes, at the time it seemed obvious one of the biggest stories of 2020 would be Harry and Meghan writing themselves out of Series 43 of The Crown by quitting the monarchy and withdrawing from public life, like we all have. The British press were outraged. After all, they'd bent over backwards to welcome Meghan with warm, open hostility, and they'd only really been tangentially involved in the death of Harry's mother. Now the traitorous twosome were toffing off to Canada to become real royalty, by which I mean celebrities. But it wasn't just the press who were up in arms. The average British citizen was equally appalled, as this searing interview proved.
They're going against the Queen, the monarchy. They're not informing her. This is not right.
But the surprises supplied by regal royalty were nothing compared to the shocks laid down by TV royalty in a stunning episode of This Morning.
Today, Philip would like to share something with you.
Yes, in a bizarre ventriloquist act, Holly Willoughby temporarily identified as Philip Schofield to announce they were now identifying as a gay man, which is as 2020 as it gets.
You never know what is going on in someone's seemingly perfect life, what issues they are struggling with, or the state of their well-being. And so you won't know that what has been consuming me for the last few years.
God, this is weird, actually, because when she speaks and it cuts to him, it feels like you're hearing his internal monologue, especially if you put some reverb over the top.
I've been coming to terms with the fact that I am gay. This is something that has caused many heartbreaking conversations at home.
See? Anyway, with that, after 58 years, the beloved silver-haired This Morning wingman had come out, just in time for the government to tell him and the rest of us to go back in. At around the same time, Brexit officially happened, and the average citizen was delighted. And why not? Hooray! At long last, the UK is finally able to banish unskilled workers like fruit pickers and delivery drivers and carers and all those other people we don't need and definitely won't ever stand outside our homes to applaud just weeks from now. And we've earned that extra £350 million a week for the NHS pledged by that magic bus. They probably won't even know what to spend it on. But while all of that was going on, bubbling away in the background, on the other side of the world, was a different story altogether.
It's been confirmed that a new virus that has killed 3 people and has been spreading across China can be passed from person to person, not just from animals.
China? That's miles away. Who gives a f***?
The outbreak centres on the city of Wuhan.
Never heard of it.
Population 11 million.
Never heard of them.
Where the source is thought to be a seafood market.
Never even been there. Why are you telling me this anyway? Stop wasting my time. Yes, the story that would come to dominate all our lives had already begun as a novel coronavirus seen here spinning around in the Matrix had emerged in China. Nobody knows exactly where it came from, but it seems to have emerged in a Wuhan wet market, which sounds erotic, but as you can see, isn't. unless this is what you're into. I mean, normally I'd judge you for that, but right now, f it, I say get your kicks where you can. The Chinese authorities immediately swung into cover-up until it became apparent they couldn't keep the story or the virus under wraps, and it began to spread across Asia like a gap-year backpacker on fast forward.
Cases of coronavirus have now been confirmed in Thailand.
Thailand? Basically the same as China, isn't it?
It's now been confirmed for the first time in Hong Kong.
Doesn't bother me, that's just next door to China.
Now, in South Korea, officials say the number of new coronavirus cases has more than doubled.
South Korea, that is the same as China.
North Korea continues to claim it has 0 confirmed coronavirus cases.
There you go, stopped already, never even left China.
There have been 2 confirmed cases of coronavirus in France.
I didn't know France was in China. Fortunately, the British government were taking the reports of a sinister new virus seriously enough to hold a series of early Cobra meetings, although not quite seriously enough for Boris Johnson to attend them. I mean, he's only the Prime Minister. He's not Dominic Cummings or someone important like that. Instead, it was down to Health Secretary and your sister's first boyfriend with a car, Matt Hancock, to chair the shit out of it.
We just held a Cobra meeting on the coronavirus concerns.
Yeah? Well, I'm currently holding a twirl, so who's the f***ing winner here?
The clinical advice is that the risk to the public remains low.
There you go, it's low risk. Back to my day job, licking door handles. This one is from a shopping mall toilet. Even now, there was still a hope the virus would be contained. After all, the Chinese were doing all they could, restricting travel, releasing drones and deploying an impressive infection control squad with its own net.
China is going all out to contain the virus.
Despite their deployment of the net, some said China's early response hadn't been great, that they'd silenced whistleblowers and been less than honest. Although not everyone agreed.
Today, though, the World Health Organization was full of praise.
China has rolled out probably the most ambitious and I would say agile and aggressive disease containment effort in history.
Come to think of it, though, thanks to the mask, you can't actually see his lips move, so the Chinese could have dubbed all this praise on. He could be saying anything. Look. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Mr. McBumcake. I bake bum cakes for a living. I'm 49 years old. By now, a handful of cases had emerged in the UK, but there was still a general lack of outright fear.
Health officials here in the UK still are of the view that this could be contained. In other words, that the number of cases in countries like the UK might be in the dozens.
Dozens? That's nothing! This one, incidentally, is from a Wuhan waiting room. By the end of February, the situation in Italy, in particular, had become increasingly serious. Hopes of containment faded, stock markets were getting spooked, and the World Health Organization announced it was time to prepare for a pandemic. Luckily, mega womble Boris Johnson, seen here disguised as a lemon, was confident Britain could handle it.
Coronavirus is of concern. It's a novel illness, but it's something that this country really amply has the resources to deal with. We have state-of-the-art testing facilities. We have a fantastic NHS.
There you go, ample resources for the NHS. 350 million a week of them, in fact, thanks to the super bus. It's got a boot full of protective masks, you know. This whole thing is going to be a breeze. A few days later, Bojo was back, flanked by a happy doctor with glasses and a friendly demeanour, and a sad doctor resembling Tintin prematurely aged after watching his dog drown. The classic good doc, sad doc combo, basically, with Boris in the middle to reiterate just how well prepared we were.
And let's not forget, we already have a fantastic NHS, fantastic testing systems, and fantastic surveillance of the spread of the disease.
There you go, fantastic testing and surveillance. Yeah, it's not like infected people could be just flying in around the clock from anywhere in the world. Thank God the authorities are across this. Although there's got to be something us regular little people can do. Do tell.
We must not forget what we can all do to fight this virus, which is to wash our hands. You knew I was going to say this, but wash our hands with soap and water. And forgive me.
OK, how long should I wash them?
For the length of time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice.
Right, OK, wash hands for length of time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. Happy birthday twice. OK, anything else?
I want to stress that for the vast majority of the people of this country, we should be going about our business as usual.
Oh, OK, business as usual then. Back to the day job.
There's been a bit of confusing advice about things like shaking hands.
Where's the confusion? Obviously, everyone should avoid doing that.
No, well, Victoria, I can tell you that I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody.
Oh, right. So actually, it's fine to go to a hospital full of coronavirus patients and shake hands with absolutely everybody. Is that right?
I think the scientific evidence is, well, I'll hand over to the experts, but our judgment is wash. Washing your hands is the crucial thing.
Yeah, wash your hands while you sing Happy Birthday twice.
Before you shake hands, obviously.
Yes, right, but not after. Got it. Over the next few days, Boris was out and about, wambling free and continuing to shake hands like there was no tomorrow, or indeed the day after that. He even found time to swing by this morning and shake hands with Phil and Holes, who was really spreading himself around for the first time in his life. Still, presumably, his hands were spotless, as were everybody's, because suddenly, advice on exactly how to wash your hands was everywhere, especially from celebrities, who are used to washing their hands after meeting the public.
Right, a simple wash of the hands. First off, quickly wet the hands, just lightly. And then from there, a nice dose of soap.
God, it would be a miracle if he can get through this without calling his right hand a wanker and reducing his left hand to tears. Uninteresting car inhabitant Lewis Hamilton took his digits for a pit stop in the sink.
Rubbing in between your fingers, the nails, both sides, front and back.
Incredibly, watching him wash his hands at length is the only thing on earth more boring than Formula One. Still, thank God coronavirus doesn't mainly spread through unwiped arses, or he'd be showing us how to clean our little bum buttons properly. Of course, you know actually how an F1 driver wipes their arse. They go round and round forever and leave it covered in skid marks. Not that there was any toilet paper to be found, thanks to all the panic buying. Yes, the toilet paper panic began down under as images of empty shelves and overstuffed trolleys started filling screens. Before long, as the coverage made clear, people everywhere were stockpiling enough bum rag to service a county-wide festival of dysentery. Oh, look at these selfish, panicking pricks buying all the bog roll. Thanks to them, I'm going to have to run down there and grab as much as I can. Not in a panicky sort of way, I'm not panicking. Unless they shut the shop down. What if they shut the shop down? Where are my shoes? Where are my f***ing shoes? People weren't just buying toilet roll, supplies of hand gel, pasta and yeast were also snapped up, which, to be fair, is a tasty combo. Before long, the shelves had gone full Mother Hubbard. Although it wasn't all bad, on the plus side, their supplies of f*** were through the roof. And shopping online wasn't much better. In fact, you had about as much chance of getting a delivery slot as I do of spontaneously shitting a tricycle. I don't know why I said that. Blame the lockdown. The reports of panic buying and coverage of other countries' rigorous response to the illness was steadily building coronavirus's brand awareness, but it really made the leap from hot underground trend to mainstream household name when international superstar Tom Hanks got it, thereby proving the virus could also affect cinematic everymen. CNN suffered one of the telltale symptoms, a sudden and complete loss of taste.
We think of Tom Hanks as a positive kind of guy, not a guy who tests positive.
Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
But to get coronavirus?
Shit was getting real.
Early March was when the whole coronavirus thing got really serious. I mean, I'd sort of been enjoying it until then because it was like a disaster movie, but then it suddenly became a 3D disaster movie, which was actually happening. All across Europe, they started shutting everything down to deal with it. But in Britain, almost everything was still open.
Some people said we should do what other people in Europe were doing, but we couldn't see what they were doing because they were all indoors. And since our passports went blue, we don't have to do what they say anyway, no matter how sensible it looks.
People in overseas world were wearing masks and keeping their distance. But over here, Boris Johnson was shaking hands with everyone in sight. Maybe after spitting in his palm first as an act of dominance, or just to keep it clean, which would be thoughtful of him.
Anyway, some people thought it was all getting confusing, so to clear things up, Boris Johnson held one of those emergency press briefings they've got into.
I've got to be clear, we've all got to be clear, this is the worst public health crisis for a generation.
I thought, here goes, you know, they're going to shut everything down immediately because it's serious. But instead, they said we didn't have to shut things down until it got more serious.
This is the shape of an epidemic.
They showed all these graphs that proved if you didn't shut everything down at the right moment, the middle of the virus would bulge up into a sort of big dick of doom. Whereas if we timed it right, we could flatten the curve that we were falling behind. Even massive events weren't shut down. Like the Cheltenham Horse Olympics was still on, and you could see from the coverage that there were loads of people there. Luckily, a human can't catch coronavirus from a horse, unless it's a pantomime horse, which are disqualified from Cheltenham anyway.
They got criticised for that, but the official line was that stopping mass gatherings now wouldn't make as much difference as it would later, when there'd be more people spreading the virus they'd caught at the first load of mass gatherings. But then the Premier League said, bollocks to this, we're turning the football off. And that was an even bigger shot across the bows than Tom Hanks had been, so the government had to come out again for another briefing to clear things up.
Now is the time for everyone to stop non-essential contact with others and to stop all unnecessary travel.
But they still didn't shut things down. Instead, they advised people to avoid things like pubs, rather than ordering the pubs to actually shut. It sounds mental at first, but what it meant was pubs could remain open, endangering customers and staff, but that while that was happening, they were also watching their business dwindle away to nothing. Actually, it is still mental, isn't it? Some people said the government was secretly going for a policy of herd immunity, which is what happens when the majority of the population has already had something and won't ever get it again, so it totally dies out. Like what happened with fidget spinners.
Anyway, by now, everyone was clamouring for a total lockdown. So Boris came out like a sort of downbeat Santa and gave the public what he wanted.
There now follows a ministerial broadcast from the Prime Minister.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Christ, OK, but is there going to be something more cheerful to watch?
I urge you, at this moment of national emergency, to stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives.
Don't know about you, but I preferred his earlier, funnier material.
A fortnight ago, London was a throbbing global city. Tonight, it's reduced to providing life support.
No sooner had the lockdown begun than reporters ran outdoors to see what a world where you weren't allowed outdoors was like.
The shops are closed, the theatres are dark, the bars are shut.
That theatre behind him doesn't look very dark. Although, come to think of it, that's the Michael Jackson musical, so actually it's dark as f***. In fact, Michael Jackson was ahead of the curve on coronavirus. He was wearing gloves and a mask years ago. Probably still is. In fact, if we're short of supplies, they should go and dig him up. He's a PPE goldmine. The reporters also found some people who found following the rules difficult.
What are you doing here tonight?
I'm doing my YouTube channel.
A YouTube channel?
Yeah, I got my YouTube channel.
Do you think you should really be out?
Yeah.
Going out and filming in the middle of the street? That's not essential. I'm glad you filmed him doing that. Although, come to think of it, he could have been saying anything. Look.
Hello, I am Mr. Bum. I'm from the planet Bum Bottom. I have a stinky bum.
I'm 50 next year. Anyway, come the dawn, the lockdown had begun in earnest, and very quickly people found themselves having to adapt to a whole new way of life, without much life in it.
Soon you were only allowed outside for one of 4 reasons: exercise, food shopping, to collect medicine, and to snitch on anyone who wasn't following those rules.
Before long, the internet became an open-source gallery of shame for sunbathers, lingerers, and anyone whose chosen exercise was deemed irresponsible. Oh, God, look at that. Outrageous. Yes, my favourite form of exercise is to spend 1 hour a day pointing the finger at photos of rule breakers on social media. You bastards! Luckily, the police were on hand to enforce the social distancing.
You shouldn't be driving unless it's essential. Bringing your dogs. Have you seen the Home Office guidance on it? Yeah, I just couldn't be bothered.
Some cops even tried policing the sky, sending drones over remote beauty spots to shame people who were socially distancing too much by walking around in the middle of nowhere. Not essential! Oh, this really is a fucking good workout, actually. The Fitbit says my heart rate's through the roof. Anyone who did make it outside for their allotted daily exercise was ordered to maintain a 2-metre exclusion zone from other people at all times, which was also one of Harvey Weinstein's bail conditions. Trouble is, many people don't seem to understand exactly how long 2 metres is. It's actually about the length of one TV's Richard Osman lying down. Not that he's allowed to lie down without being moved on by the police. Sadly, of course, Richard Osman can't be everywhere, although he fucking well seems to be if you watch TV as much as I do right now. Another notable change to the outside world was the number of people sporting some kind of face covering. It was like Hannibal Lecter cosplay. Of course, actually getting a mask wasn't easy, even if you were a frontline worker. In fact, especially then. Although you could always make your own.
It's not compulsory to wear a face covering in Scotland, but the government say it could become so.
Yeah, you say that, but you could be saying anything.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Bum, wife of Mr. Bum.
5 decades I'll have been on this planet. Actually, I'd make my own mask like this lot, but I'm not very good with my hands. Although, luckily, my wife has years of Blue Peter experience and can make the most out of any old shit she can find, which is why she married me. To be honest, I'm not sure this one she made is exactly on brand for me, but her mask was so good, I've also given her some squeezy bottles so she can knock up a ventilator. And when you finish with that, get to work on a vaccine, yeah? Tick-tock, come on.
This is a vital update about coronavirus. To help save lives, stay home.
Meanwhile, TV kept imploring you not to go out. Millions of people started working from home, just like serial killers have always done. This meant restricting your space even more from whatever room you were in, down to a little buffering rectangle on a screen from which there was no escape. I've always hated video calls because they're a bit like prison visits, really. Mind you, it's hard to get any work done at all with your family around you. That's why I tend to interrupt video calls early by shaking the laptop and pretending there's a natural disaster happening. Sorry, I'm going to have to call you back. There's some kind of earthquake going on. Of course, homeschooling the kiddywinks has been another challenge. Luckily, I'm married to one of the nicest people in Britain, and she's a natural with kids.
Come on, write the answer properly. No, properly. Ah, for God's sake, you've ruined our lives!
In a way, the continual urging to remain indoors was good news for TV networks, which could enjoy record audiences. But it wasn't without its own set of problems. For one thing, many shows that had been shot before the pandemic, which would normally seem cosy and harmless, suddenly looked freakishly irresponsible. Take lovely old Antiques Roadshow. There's no way that's an essential gathering. Please disperse immediately.
Nowadays, you'd be looking at more like 2,500.
Gosh! Yeah, I wouldn't get too excited. In today's money, that's 2 bottles of hand gel. On the other hand, current shows made under lockdown conditions had their own problems, especially some of the ones shot at home which took on the air of a hostage video, the one where the hostages had gone mad and thought they were in showbiz.
Let's do this together. I haven't got a crew anymore. I'm shooting this on my phone, and my cameraman is now my wife.
Big studio shows were also a tad hamstrung. Often the presenters had to appear oddly standoffish by law, or there was a glaring lack of any kind of audience.
Thank you. They're trying. Hello, everybody.
It's all uncomfortably like the Michelin Webb Remain Indoors quiz show set after an apocalypse.
Hello, good evening, and remain indoors. This is the quiz broadcast, coming to you every Friday, the same day as your food parcels. So chow down on a protein fudge, take whatever injections are recommended in your sector, and prepare to enjoy the show.
Sport was also badly affected. Most of it was cancelled outright, but some things went ahead, notably some haunting editions of WrestleMania, which, because they didn't have an audience, had the feel of some kind of specialist video downloaded off the dark web. With the actual Aintree off the menu, ITV gamely proceeded with an eerie virtual Grand National filmed live inside a PlayStation.
They're already at the 14th. Tiger Roll landed just ahead. He nodded slightly on landing.
Oh, if you ask me, this is a missed opportunity. Because it's virtual, they could have done anything, like added a loop-the-loop or had ghosts chasing them, or made it so that whenever one of the horses fell, you got to jump into the game in a first-person perspective and finish it off with a shotgun. Take that! Make room in the freezer. I've got us enough horse meat for a month. F*** a cardo. Giant music festivals had also been totally Glastonburied, but it takes more than a pandemic to stop the music. In Italy, people started singing opera on their balconies. At least I think she's singing. Maybe that's just what Italian ambulances sound like. This inspired Wonder Woman Gal Gadot to rope in a bunch of her famous chums to sing a cover of Imagine, which united millions against her.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
If only John Lennon was alive to see this. He'd be ringing Mark Chapman and screaming his own coordinates down the phone. Music lovers could also enjoy the inspiring One World Together at Home concert, where the great and good lifted all our spirits by serenading the globe from their humble luxury mansions. It was great news for anyone who's ever wondered what a Skype call with Paul McCartney or a Zoom conference with the Rolling Stones would look like. Thing is, a lot of the song choices were sort of depressing, and I'm not sure that's quite the mood a frightened and worried world needed.
Smile though your heart is breaking. Smile even though it's aching.
Oh yeah, I'm smiling all right, can't you see? Although there was one rib-tickling highlight when, in a bid to unite the planet, King Elton John unveiled an entirely new global language containing no vowels or consonants, which he's invented, called Cringelish, and he used it to perform his evergreen hit, While I'm Still Dabbing.
You know, I'm still dabbing, better than I ever did. Looking like a true survivor, feeling like a little kid. I'm still standing after all that time, backing up the pieces of my life with that chap on my mind. I'm still standing, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Say what you like about the coronavirus pandemic, but it's a proper test for our generation. I mean, I thought the KFC chicken shortage of 2018 was bad, but this is a whole other level. I mean, it's almost that times 2. It's a bit like being in a war, except instead of being up against Adolf Hitler and the Nasties and the Luftwaffe blitzing the shit out of towns in black and white, we're fighting a sort of alien football from another dimension that tries to fly up your nose. You can't see it, so you can't shoot at it or shout at it to go away. I mean, you can't even duck.
No one knows exactly where it came from, although there's a theory someone bought it at a market in China and then spread it around the world. To be honest, it's a scandal it was even on sale in the first place. Next time someone starts flogging a virus, they need to make sure the instructions are a lot clearer, because I'm not going through this again.
Some people think it was created in a factory on purpose, like Pringles, but evil, and tiny, and invisible, and flavoured with disease, which Pringles aren't. Although, as far as I'm concerned, the paprika ones might as well be. And if you tried those, fucking shocking.
My mate Paul says the virus is spread by a new 5G phone signal, but the mainstream media is trying to cover that up just because it isn't true. Phone companies say 5G is safe, but they can't know because 5G is totally unlike anything we've seen before, apart from 4G and 3G and 2G and 1G, which I think was called WAP, probably to put us off the scent. Anyway, Paul sent me this really interesting video where David Icke managed to get the message out.
If they start firing out 5G at 60 gigahertz, they're going to have a lot of people who are going to keel over because they can't absorb oxygen.
I thought he was talking out of his arse, but then Paul explained how the phone companies use a Jewish computer to replace everything David Icke says with absolute bullshit in a bid to discredit him. As soon as he said that, the way David Icke doesn't make sense suddenly made sense. It's like seeing through the Matrix, which also runs on 5G. People started setting fire to 5G phone masts to stop the spread and also to stop people being able to ring the hospital, which is important in a pandemic.
Anyway, I don't think people should listen to conspiracy theorists. They should just listen to the proper authorities, like Donald Trump. Trump said maybe you could use disinfectant to cure the virus by getting it into the body somehow.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection?
Anyway, the press went mental at him for saying that, just because it'd be deadly.
This is so beyond madness.
I mean, the thing is, he's right, because if you kill yourself with bleach, you're immune to the virus forever, and you can rejoin the workforce as like food or something for animals.
He also said the virus doesn't like sunlight, so he asked his experts to look into how you might get sunlight into the body.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way.
My mate Paul showed me a video of a bloke trying to get sunlight into his body by taking a relaxant that loosened all his orifices and then doing some sort of bum yoga. I say a bloke, it was probably Paul himself, but you couldn't tell because he was in a Spider-Man mask. And I don't know if what he was doing could cure COVID-19, but to be honest, that looked like the least of his worries.
Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. How would you grade President Trump's leadership in the nation's fight against the Wuhan Chinese virus?
Despite Trump's unusual statements, his popularity rating has remained roughly as stable as he's not. In alarming scenes, some of his more heavily armed, freedom-loving fans gathered to demand an end to social distancing measures which have closed shopping malls and cinemas across America, thereby crippling its mass shooting industry. Meanwhile, in Britain, a cheerier demonstration was the weekly nationwide clap-along, a noisy, cathartic outburst in which millions put their hands together for nurses, carers, supermarket staff and delivery drivers. It made a nice change, really, because I don't know about you, but the last time I applauded a delivery driver, I was doing it sarcastically after he threw an Amazon parcel over the gate. Also bringing the nation together, King Elizabeth the Queen delivered a stirring address to the nation, reminding us all that whether you live in an opulent castle or just a mere palace, we're all in this together.
Better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Oh, that's a lovely sentiment, but hang on a minute, that sign language interpreter is far too close. Move away from Her Majesty immediately. The regal intervention was a sign that the crisis really was as unprecedented as they kept telling us, and then something that somehow shouldn't have been shocking, but also somehow very much was, happened.
Some breaking news from the UK. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been admitted to intensive care.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson had been self-isolating with the virus when his condition worsened and he wound up in intensive care. At one point, there were even fears he might become the first Prime Minister to die in office since Gordon Brown. Fortunately, before long, Johnson fought off the virus and returned to Downing Street, shortly before becoming a father for the 100th time. Still, the fact that even the Prime Minister could find himself in such desperate circumstances was a reminder of how indiscriminate and dangerous the virus is. I say indiscriminate, but some groups have been more at risk, with frontline workers, ethnic minorities and the impoverished all disproportionately affected. We may be all in this together, but some are sadly more in than others. And all the while, the number of victims continued to climb and the daily statistics grew steadily grimmer, and we grew accustomed to seeing tragedy upon tragedy depicted in the form of emotionless charts. Amongst all this, are there any rays of hope? And does hope have rays anyway? Well, I suppose for one thing, in my youth I watched a lot of apocalyptic TV shows, things like Day of the Triffids, and in those, society always descended into looting and destruction within about 5 minutes, whereas now, that hasn't actually happened. Yet. Instead, you're more likely to be stuck indoors watching Tiger King or Quiz or sketching rainbows or applauding the NHS out the window. And those are the sort of things that don't tend to happen in dystopian dramas. There's been more unity than dramatists like me might have expected, which is what we need. So, to wear my earnest hat for a moment, whoever and however you are, do hold on, because we need you. Oh, that felt disgusting. One staple of lockdown life has been this weird new daytime game show BBC One keeps putting on every afternoon, about the same time.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Downing Street for the government's daily press conference on coronavirus.
According to the EPG, it's called Daily Briefing, which isn't the best title for a game show. But then I suppose lockdown was taken. Don't know what the rules are, they just sort of stand at the podiums, never buzzing in. And whenever there is a question, it's incredibly hard.
What sort of economic modelling have you done on the various lockdown exit scenarios?
Patrick, do you want to try to get hands? Chris, go ahead.
And even though they're constantly promising to give loads of money and equipment away, there's never any winners. In fact, we're always losing to Germany and South Korea. Apparently, Boris Johnson was the regular presenter, but while he was off sick, the show had to make do with a series of special guest hosts who became familiar faces very quickly. Like Apprentice finalist Rishi Sunak, this sort of EastEnders baddie, Penfold from Danger Mouse, Penfold 2.0, and of course Peter Pandemic, the estate agent boy. To be fair, he's actually out there grappling with the pandemic while his boss is off sick. Of course, it's easy for me to sit on my arse taking the piss, which is why I'm doing that. Another thing the situation has done is provide a window into journalists' lives, literally. Maybe I'm a prick, but I find it impossible not to make instant sweeping judgments about them.
Yesterday's briefing of the Chief Medical Officer.
You haven't got many books, have you? What a Philistine!
It's one for...
Well, where are you, the backroom of foils? You've never read all of those, you show-off.
Chancellor, you say the Prime Minister is improving.
Well, I don't like that leafy wallpaper. If you want to go outside, just go outside.
Thank you. A question firstly to the Health Secretary on an issue...
Ooh, someone's got a garden. Not everybody's as lucky as you know.
Just back to your job retention scheme.
That background is way too cluttered. Come on, tidy up, keep it simple.
The public wearing face masks.
Oh, that's just way too boring. Make an effort.
Professor Powis, can you...
Well, you haven't framed yourself very well, have you? Hire a cameraman.
And secondly, if I
Oh, Jesus, you're far too close. Get back! Get back! My hilarious snap judgments aside, there were questions to be asked. The government was facing criticism over its response to the crisis. And presently, poor Peter Pandemic was picked up over the PPE pickle by a progressively prickly press pack.
There's this boy called Matt Hancock who's in charge of the National Health Factory. Every day on the government briefing show, journalists kept materialising on a screen to ask questions from the little rooms. And he had to answer most of the queries like he was in a sort of call centre in hell.
Health and care workers are saying to us they are still struggling in some cases to get that equipment. They feel unsafe.
The journalists kept asking whether NHS staff had protection. I mean, as if they're going to be shagging anyway during a pandemic. The bloke nurses probably can't even get proper wood because they're worried about other things, like the lack of masks.
The press people also kept saying the NHS staff weren't being given enough tests, which is mad. Surely the situation's stressful enough without making them sit exams. Anyway, Matt Hancock was under loads of pressure, so he promised there'd be 100,000 tests a day by the end of April.
I am now setting the goal of 100,000 tests per day by the end of this month.
And then afterwards he realised people had heard him say that, so now he had to deliver. They opened up drive-through testing centres for people who had coronavirus in a car. You wound down your window and a stranger would stick a swab in your mouth, but they weren't very popular and looked empty half the time. If they'd let you order chicken nuggets, they might have had more uptake. I suggested that to them at the time, but they didn't even reply to any of my emails. Then they ramped the testing up and posted loads of kits out and did 2-for-1 offers on them and all sorts. And sure enough, Matt Hancock hit his target just in time.
Then, some journalists noticed 40,000 of the tests hadn't actually happened yet, and some of them had been done on the same people twice. And people moan about that, but they're missing a point, which is that if the virus thinks we can do 100,000 tests a day, there's a good chance it'll call off the invasion and we can all go back to normality again. If we can remember what that's like.
We must stay alert, control the virus, and save lives.
Recently, Boris Johnson did an Open University lecture to explain how he's going to loosen the lockdown using diagrams and some sort of algebra. People complained that the government's advice was getting more confusing by the day, which was clever in itself because confused people tend to stand still going, instead of moving around spreading germs, and if they cough, their hands are already over their mouths.
To be fair, we're all sick to the tits of being stuck indoors staring at our phones. We want to go to the pub and stare at our phones there like we used to in before times. I mean, I used to hate crowds. Now I'm so desperate I use a VR headset to remind me what they were like. Oh God, I can barely move. This is great. Oh, we're packed in like sardines. Whee! Oh, get off my foot! Of course, the one thing that's really going to release us from this hell is the discovery of a vaccine. So how long will it take? And in the meantime, who can tell us more about vaccines? I'll tell you who, our very own Philomena Kunk, in her very own Moment of Wonder.
For thousands of years, man has been getting better, thanks to one single thing: medicines. Medicines means we can treat everything from made-up diseases like the plague to modern epidemics like allergicness to bread. The ancient Egyptians thought that onions were medicine, but they're not. They literally didn't know they're onions, and that's where we get the phrase from. Of course, today, we now know that onions are not a medicine. Onions are disgusting. But the best kind of medicine is a vaccine, because it stops you needing medicine in the first place. The world is waiting for a vaccine for the coronavirus, but we don't have one yet. To find out more about it, I spoke to an expert, but he had to do it on a computer, so it sounds a bit shit. Hello, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Professor Andrew Pollard, and I'm Director of the Oxford Vaccine Group.
You sound like an expert. What's your background?
My background is in developing and evaluating vaccines, but I also work in the infectious diseases of children, so have learnt a bit about viruses that affect children over the last 25 years.
No, I meant what's your background? What is that, your office or your living room?
This is my office here, which is where I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment working on vaccines for coronavirus.
What's that thing on the wall? It looks like a big stain. It looks like damp.
It's actually a map of Nepal.
Why is it called the coronavirus?
Well, it's called the coronavirus because of the appearance of the virus. All around the surface of the virus is this spike protein that looks like a crown, so the coronavirus.
Doesn't look like a crown to me. It looks more like a big football. Sometimes it looks massive. Like when I've seen people standing next to it on the news, it sort of comes up to their waist. How's that going to get up your nose?
Yeah, so the way that the virus is presented on news stories is a blown-up picture. It's actually so tiny that you can't see it. Even with a normal microscope, you can't see it.
Is the virus alive?
That's a really good question. It is difficult to answer that question. Some scientists say viruses are not alive, and some say they are.
So the virus might not be alive like spiders. My mate Paul sent me this thing on YouTube which proves that spiders aren't actually alive. They just look as if they are, and no one knows what they're made of.
Yes, I mean, I think we do know a lot about spiders, and it's very clear that they are alive, that spiders are alive.
Do vaccines always have to be injected? You know, or could you make like vaccine biscuits or something?
So vaccines don't always have to be injected. There's an influenza vaccine which can be squirted up the nose.
Has anyone thought about trying to miniaturise a doctor and inject him into the body so he can fight it hand to hand?
Well, I think the problem with that idea, apart from the physics of it, would be that a single doctor would have a really big task on their hands.
But if they whittled it down to the doctors who could do karate and stuff, how many miniaturised doctors would you need? Say like 30?
I suspect that the simplest way of approaching this would be to have one doctor or a nurse who was able to provide a vaccine that was effective and protect people so that we didn't have to go down that route in the first place.
Sorry, I wasn't listening to any of that. A delivery slot just came up. How do you hang up on this thing?
Well, I think you have to click leave and then you leave.
Right now, a coronavirus vaccine is on trial, but we'll have to wait to discover if it's guilty or not. Although, in more positive news, my supermarket delivery arrived and the only substitution was hash browns instead of potato waffles. Next time on Moments of Wonder, I'll be asking why there's more water in a tap than you'd expect.
Well, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. It's been fun, really, being back on your screens, apart from the surrounding pandemic aspect, which is awful. Anyway, until we meet again, look after yourself and go away.